fans, welcome back to Room 237 as I continue my marathon of Italian horror and Giallo films. Now, I've been doing a lot of Giallo from early 70s, even some from the 60s, the pre-Argento era. Haven't really done a lot from the 80s. In fact, I think in this entire marathon, I've done 2 from the 80s, Fulci's Murder Rock and Murder Obsession. It is known that by the 80s, Giallo was pretty much dead. I mean, Fulci made a couple. Argento was able to keep it lively. There were a couple other ones. But one era I have not touched upon yet is the 90s. Which, yeah, if people think Giallo is pretty much dead, except for some gems in the 80s, look at the 90s. There's hardly any. I mean, there's Trauma by Argento, which I'll have to buy offline at some point. Stendhal Syndrome, which I do have and I need to get to. I'm saving all my Argento for the end of the marathon. It's kind of like a mini marathon. The Washing Machine by Ruggero Deodato. I know, silly name. But yeah, there wasn't really a lot in the 90s, and even then, they're kind of seen as duds, maybe gems. But then there's this one, which is actually the final Giallo. It's the final Giallo by this director. In fact, I think it's his final thriller altogether, Lamberto Bava. And I've said before, highly underrated director. I don't think he ever got out of the shadow of his father, Mario Bava. Never seen as more than a protege of Dario Argento. Of course, even some of Bava's work is overshadowed by Argento because he produces it. Like, say, Demons or The Church. Actually, The Church was directed by Michele Soavi, but still, Demons and Demons 2. But this is his 1992 Giallo, his final Giallo, Body Puzzle. And, of course, this is for a Raro Video. This is the last one I have by Raro Video. So I have 5 DVDs and 1 Blu-ray from a Raro Video. And they do some decent work. Also, one side note, if I'm stuttering or stammering more than usual, it's because it is very, very, very late or early in the morning. I haven't had any sleep. I'm trying to take as much advantage of this video time as possible because I have some free time. This is the only Giallo I've seen for the 90s so far. Again, I still need to see Stendhal Syndrome. But, and actually, while I was reading about this film, because there's not a lot about this film, it doesn't have a Wikipedia page. Another website I look at, Giallo Files, there's not one on that. I have been reading Troy Howarth's 3-volume Encyclopedia on Giallos. It does have an article in volume 2. But I have said before, Bava has never been a fan of Giallo. He doesn't really like doing movies where, you know, women or people get stabbed and there's blood everywhere. The thriller was never his thing. He just kind of got lumped into it because he helped his father direct Shock, his father's final film, and then he became the next horror Bava. And then he worked with Argento. His actual field was fantasy. And around this time, which I'll actually look up the name of it, there was a TV movie that he did, which I can't remember the name of it. That's what I'm looking up now. And it's very high fantasy. You know, I don't want to go ahead and say like Lord of the Rings, but I think it was more of something like that. And that's what Bava really always wanted to do. And in fact, I think he did one, then he did this, and then he did all the sequels to that fantasy film. And one of the reasons why I bring that up is because this does have a very made-for-TV film look to it, which so did Midnight Killer. I think Midnight Killer was a better movie than this, but Cave of the Golden Rose, that was the name of the fantasy. Yeah, that was in 1991. It was a TV miniseries. Then he did Body Puzzle. And then he did Cave of the Golden Rose 2, 3, and 4. All in succession. And yeah, this does kind of feel like someone retreading waters that they don't want to go back to. It does have a TV movie look to it, which the cinematographer, Luigi Cuvaler, if I pronounce that correctly, he was the cinematographer on Deep Red, which, it's Deep Red. It's phenomenal. The editing is by Pietro Bozza, who also edited, I think he edited Opera, Demons. So, I mean, everyone is kind of not bringing their best work to it. Also did cinematographer for Deep Red. Also did Lizard and Woman's Skin and New York Ripper. So the guy is a good cinematographer. And it's not to say that this movie is lackluster. I mean, there are still some... It is lackluster, but there are still some good inventive shots. It stars Thomas Arena and Joanna Pacula. Francois Montagut and Gianni Garco. And it was also released under the title Misteria, with M-I instead of M-Y, which I think is a decent title, but the Body Puzzle does play into the plot a bit more. And it was written by Lamberto Bava and Tadoro Cora. And I will say that the writing does seem pretty solid up until about the third act, up until the twists start happening. Then it gets a bit confusing, and it kind of leaves open ends for what happened earlier. So the writing isn't the strongest. Also, there's an appearance by, God, why do I always forget his full name? Giovanni Ribardo Radice. Why can I never remember his damn name? He was in House on the Edge of the Park, Cannibal Ferox. He was in Stage Fright. He was one of the first, probably the first Italian actor that I recognized being in other movies when I first started watching Italian films. He's one of my favorite like Italian character actors, especially for exploitation. Giovanni Lombardo Radice. That guy. Yeah, he has a small role. It's great seeing him. But, yeah, this... I mean, it pops up on Giallo lists, but at the same time, for like the first two acts, I thought it felt more like a slasher because all the victims felt random. But it does do a good job at tying everything up towards the end, but there is some major plot holes that I'm still kind of confused by. And this is one of those gialli where we know who the killer is. We don't exactly know his name, but we see his face. And see him in the very first scene. We see him do all the kills. Yeah, he wears pantyhose over his head for a couple, but we know it's him. But his motive and really who he is unfolds more as the plot goes on. And it does have Inspector Livet, played by Thomas Arena. He's on the case, and so it does have kind of the police procedural aspect to it. So it really is a Giallo, but yeah, it's a different approach to it. The twists. Okay, so it starts out with our killer, played by Francois Montagut, if I pronounce that correctly. He's at the piano. The piece Night on Bald Mountain is playing. It looks as if he's playing it, but then he just starts banging the piano, and we just hear like the smash of the wood, and we know it's coming through a headset, so he's not really playing it. And then we cut to a flashback where he's in a car, he's chasing someone on a motorcycle, not trying to kill him, but trying to stop him. And then the guy on the bike wipes out. You can tell he's upset by it. He was trying to stop him. And then we cut to our main character, Tracy, played by Joanna Pacula. She's a recent widow, and when she goes to put flowers on her husband's grave, she's informed that her husband's grave has been desecrated and his body is missing. And it's at that time we see the first kill, which is a guy who works at and runs like a sweet shop. He's killed. Oh, and every time the killer goes to kill, he puts his headphones in and we hear Night on Bald Mountain. I think that was kind of like a Jaws kind of influence. Like whenever he's about to do his thing, like that's his theme. Even in scenes where we don't see him put headphones in or know he's there, it will play and then he'll come into frame. Which Jaws is a good reference because there is an underwater death, which is shot, you know, it is kind of cool looking, where he's swimming underwater and he's got the knife out in front of him. Of course, when he's stabbing the guy underwater, I don't know how much force and speed he could get while he's underwater, but he stabs the guy in the sweet shop, and the camera is behind the glass on the counter, and we see some of the blood come up on the glass. It looks cool. Baba still is able to have some flair, even with the low budget and the TV movie look to it. He also cuts off the guy's ear, and Tracy finds it in her fridge. So that's when Inspector Michael Livet suggests that maybe she should go stay at her parents' huge-ass mansion. This other woman gets killed at a mall in the women's room, which, when he's following her, there is this really great shot where it's like an upward shot. She's on the escalator. When she walks off, we see her here, and there's a mirror on the ceiling where we see the killer. So it's like they cross each other without actually crossing each other. It looked really cool. So he goes in the women's room. He jumps over into her stall, and he's able to pull like a hatchet or a small axe out of his jacket, almost like a cartoon character, because he looked like he didn't have anything, that it was there. He seems to wear this red jacket in almost every scene, and he just hacks her hand off. Her hand's on the toilet, so it goes in, and we get this shot from in the toilet, looking up, with the hand kind of floating down and him taking it out. She didn't flush, and the water does kind of have a yellowy tint to it. And then there's the guy, the young lifeguard at the pool, which after he gets everyone out, Which one, the pool's kind of gross. There's a lot of algae in that pool. There is this great, like, wide above shot where the killer goes off the diving board. That was a nice shot. And then with him, again, swimming towards the lifeguard underwater with the knife. Also, the woman in the bathroom stall had her hand was cut off and her inner chest organs were taken out, especially her heart. Her heart was missing. And the reason why I'm going through all the deaths is because, like I said, it felt more like a slasher at first because they felt so random. They're not characters that we've seen throughout the film or before. Like, they get killed in the scene they appear. There's no one that, you know, is really part of the case. Is like, oh, I just figured this out. I gotta tell you about it later, and then they get killed. It did have this very slasher-esque, you know, body count fodder kind of feel to it. But it all plays in at the end. So with that, well, no, I'll explain a little bit more before I get spoilers. Lombardo Radice, his character, he's at some ranch where people go for, I guess, romantic rendezvous. And he's an old friend of Tracy's husband, Abe. Which, another thing, when the inspector goes there, he goes in the room that Abe would stay in. And Radice even says he continued bringing both men and women here even after he was married. There was traces of cocaine in a drawer where the inspector looked, and he found this picture of Abe and the killer. You know, with the killer with his arm around him. But he didn't know he was the killer yet. He just thought he was a random person. But then Tracy says around the time, because also her brother died fairly recently, and shortly after her husband's death, no, it was after her brother died, she started getting prank calls, and someone was breaking into her apartment, and she thinks it was one of her husband's friends named Tim, but she couldn't remember his last name. Someone else is able to remember his last name. So he's following up on this guy, Tim Bell. And I guess here will be a good place to get to spoilers. But the twist I really didn't see coming. It still kind of doesn't really make sense. But the way it ties the victims together and why they were chosen, I actually like that idea. I think that's actually fairly original and clever. It plays into the title fairly well. And even for such a smaller movie, for one that he probably, again, was not that interested in, it still has some Bava flair to it. Lamberto Bava flair to it. It's definitely worth checking out. Especially for like a 90s Giallo where, you know, like why were people still making Gialli in the 90s? I guess other than Argento, but even he kind of stopped after Stendhal Syndrome, then came back to it in the 2000s. But, I mean, if you're a hardcore Giallo fan or a Lamberto Bava fan, then it's definitely worth checking out. Maybe if you're just like a thriller or mystery fan. And also the effects. The effects were done by the same person who did Opera. Franco Casani. Which, yeah, he did Stendhal Syndrome and Opera. The effects, nowhere near as good as Opera. I mean, there's some, I mean, yeah, there's the severed hand. There are some eyeballs that are loose. The lifeguard was castrated and his kidney was taken out. We don't see the castration, but it's implied. Because when it's unwrapped, Tracy's like, oh my god, it's a finger. And the inspector stands up, he's like, that's not a finger. That's the implication. It ties in well enough. And so yeah. I can recommend it if you're a hardcore Giallo fan. For the casual, maybe horror or thriller fan, you might think of it as just a cheap, made-for-TV looking movie. But I was surprised by it. I was actually really surprised by it. Is it great? No, but I went into it with very low expectations. The only thing looking forward to it is the fact that it is Lamberto Bava, and it still surprised me. It's not great, but it still surprised me. So with that, I'm going to get into spoilers, So for a while, we're supposed to believe that Tim Bell went to this mental hospital at the behest of Abe, because Abe suspected him of doing the pranks and the break-ins after Tracy's brother died. So he went and saw a therapist. And then after Abe died in the accident, which is what the opening scene was, he went to a mental hospital. And we're supposed to believe that he started getting kind of Norman Batesy, like acting like Abe and taking on the persona of Abe. And then he got a job at, I think, in the kitchen at the general hospital. And the reason why, and we find out even later why he got that job, is because all the victims, when not only the external mutilations and also the internal mutilations, was because, yes, there is a body puzzle. He's trying to rebuild Abe, which he could do with the external parts, but the internal parts was after Abe died, he was an organ donor, and heart, kidney, and then eventually we see corneas. And I don't remember what the pregnant woman was, but there was a fourth thing where they were all given out to surgery. So he's taken those parts of Abe out to rebuild Abe. And I'm like, okay, so that plays into the title. That's a clever idea. And the woman that got the cornea transplant, she's a school teacher for blind children, very young children. And this scene, she puts the audio tape on of, I can't remember what the story is, but, what was it? Something to do with a fox and a wolf. But, also the Night on Bald Mountain is playing. Oh, Peter and the Wolf. So when he comes in and kills her, it actually plays to the story with like the wolf and everything. But he sneaks up behind her, and the children are obviously blind, so they can't see anything. But one kid even gets a spurt of blood on his face and looks kind of pissed. But he takes her eyes out. And then the last person on the list of names that his donated parts went to is a pregnant woman that's about to go into labor. But as he's trying to take her, that's when Livet, sees him and is able to stop him. But then we get the other twist, which this is where the movie kind of falls apart. The movie would have been pretty damn solid if they just left it at that. Was he's trying to rebuild his friend Abe because he feels guilty. Chasing down his friend, trying to stop him, and he got in an accident and died. But when Livett shows Tracy the photo that he found, because he finds Tim Bell's hospital ID and realizes it's the same person in the picture. When he finally shows Tracy, she says, no, that's Abe. The killer, the guy we've been seeing, believing is Tim Bell, says, no, that's Abe. That's my husband. This guy is my brother. So then he runs upstairs and says, so you mean this guy, the picture I've been looking at and the audience have been looking at this whole time, is not Abe. She's like, no, that's my brother. So, and this is where it falls apart, because then how was Abe declared dead? How was his body, because we do see the dug up, decomposed body, because we find out the killer's been living and squatting in Tracy's parents' mansion along with her, and the body he dug up is in a freezer. I mean, so did he fake his own death? Did he actually kill Tim Bell? But I don't know. So then the killer does confront Tracy, and he's talking like he's Abe. He's still trying to be Abe, or something. It gets confusing. I would have much rather they left it as it's Tim Bell trying to rebuild Abe out of guilt and psychosis. But then when they try to say he's actually Abe, it kind of loses it. But then, in like a symbolic twist, he flees, and he gets on his bike and flees, and now the cops are on him too. She gets in her car, chases after him, and he crashes into someone, goes right through the windshield, and then he dies. And then it's kind of silly because the inspector tells her to go home, but then he just Incredible Hulk walks away at the end with like the overhead shot, freeze frame as he walks off into the distance. They did have the inspector main damsel romance. If this was made in like the 70s, I could have seen like a Fabio Testi in this role as well. But yeah, this movie did have a good thing going. I liked the first part of the twist, but then the final twist was really where it just opened up more holes and it actually solved, unless I missed something. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by this film for the most part. I mean, yeah, the kills aren't overly extravagant, but there is some blood there. It does have some good ideas. It does have some cool shots. Again, like the way the blood, spurts on the glass in front of the pastries as the camera's behind the counter. Or in the mall, the overhead mirror with the killer and the woman walking out. It looks like they cross each other. It still has some cool Bava flair. Definitely, you can definitely see why Giallo was really on its last leg by the 90s. Even by the late 80s. Then in the 90s, it was really limping to the barn and had to be put to rest. But I was still pleasantly surprised by this one. And, if doing this final Giallo meant Bava could continue doing the fantasy films he was passionate about, I'd say this was a fair job. You can tell there is some kind of restraint. Like, it doesn't have the passion that his earlier films did. But, you can tell Bava is a filmmaker, and even if he's not 100% behind the project, he's still going to do his best with the material. So, I say this is a fair final Giallo by Bava. And still, so far, the only one for the 90s that I've done. So, yeah, with that is Bava's Body Puzzle. I do have a couple more to get to. I have 8 more to pick up, so I'm getting towards the end. Then I have a series of, modern Giallo-inspired films. Not real Giallo, but ones that throwbacks or homage, like the French and Belgian film, Strange Color, Your Body's Tears. I will get to that. Other films like Abracadabra, Amer, or Francesca. I'll get to those Giallo tribute films after I do everything Giallo in Italian, Argento included. So yeah, 1992's Body Puzzle. So stay tuned for more, and thank you for watching.